Boop. Happy Thursday. Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2020, and our daily Bible readings for today. Just a word on that, first of all. Now that we are into the season of Pentecost, we are in a period of time, lectionary year, where we are kind of stretching out into this long kind of, regular time season of the church year that stretches out before us and ends right before Advent, which starts a whole new liturgical year in the life of the church. And so from now on out, you probably will notice that when you look at the daily Bible readings as they get posted on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, that there are actually two selections. And that is because the way the daily Bible readings are set up, the ones at the second half of the week after Wednesday are there to get you prepared for the Sunday scripture. So in other words, if your preacher at your home church is following the lectionary, the texts for the second half of the week kind of prepare you for that. And then the texts at the first half of the week get you ready or are there to help you process and follow up on what you should have heard on Sunday morning. And so right now, the lectionary offers two choices of texts. And so you'll see that reflected in the daily Bible readings. You'll see two different Psalms, and then you'll see two different Old Testament lessons, and then you also see, but you'll probably see the same New Testament lesson. So, and that's because they kind of, one is complementary, one kind of follows along, and so that, if you're wondering why all of a sudden there are like two groups of texts, that's why. More than you cared to know when you tuned into this, right? Anyway, but today's lectionary text, the daily Bible reading texts, are Psalm 116, 1 through 2, and then 12 through 19. Genesis 21, 1 through 7. Hebrews 3, 1 through 6. Or you can read Psalm 100 and Exodus 4, 18 through 23. So that's what they were today, but I'm going to focus on the Hebrews. And we're going to talk about home builders. So, when I was growing up, I grew up north. Sorry to burst y'all's bubble. Yeah, if I sound strange, there's more than a little Yankee in me. But we had places up there called Levittown. And they were named for these home builders, this guy Levitt and his sons, who were famous for building these cookie cutter houses. And they did it. It was in response to needed housing for this kind of housing boom that took place after World War II, where you had all these guys coming back from fighting World War II, and they did what guys do when they come back from fighting a war. They get married, they start families. And so suddenly there was this huge need for housing. And so Levitt just started building these towns out in suburban areas of cities. I remember the one I remember is Levittown, Long Island. There was one in Pennsylvania. I don't know how many there were. There's probably one in New Jersey. I don't know. But they were cookie cutter homes. They all pretty much, they went up really fast. It was like assembly line production. It all went up really, really fast. And to the point where the story is that you really couldn't tell one from the other. If you didn't have your wits about you, you could very well walk into the wrong house because they looked that much alike. Same paint, same layout. And, apparently there was more than one instance of people walking in and, some guy coming home from work late and walking into the wrong house and surprising somebody else's family. So wrong house, man, get out. But that kind of leads up to the question, what makes a house a home? If all those houses look the same, they're all the same, what makes the house a home? Well, today's text talks about house over and over again. It keeps using the word house, right? And I'll let you read it on your own. But the word that's being used in the text for today that keeps being translated house is a Greek word oikos. And it can mean house, like literally the building, as in all these houses in Levittown, or it can mean the actual place where people abide, right? Or it can mean a delicious Greek yogurt. But we're talking about the actual houses and homes. So literally it means a house or a building specifically inhabited. That's different from another word that you might have heard used. Sometimes you hear people, they want to be really fancy and they talk about your domicile. That's from a Greek word domos, and that really just means the building itself. Sorry, somebody just walked by my door and distracted me. Anyway, that just means like literally the building without anybody in it. What makes a home then is the people in it. Which for the people that grew up in these Levit towns, that's what made things the home for them. It wasn't because their house was any different, the building itself, the domicile was any different than anybody else's. It's because their family lived there. So that brings us to another meaning of this word, oikos. It can also mean household in the term of the group of people who form a family. So you can have a household, and we use that term that way, that refers to the people specifically, not just the building. And that household lives on regardless of what building they live in. And that's where Paul's coming from. That's what Paul's talking about today. He's really talking about the household of God. The Greek is ha oikos tu theou, which theou is theos, which means God. Tu is means it's possessive. So anyway, that's more than you cared to know. Sorry about that. Professional hazard. So we're talking about the household of God. So when Paul keeps using this term house, he's mainly using it to refer to God's household. And so the builder of a house, he says, has more honor than the house itself, right? He's not talking about literally the guy who, like the architect who designed the house, or the guy who came and nailed the 2x4s together to build the house. He's talking about like more in the sense of the founder of the house, which is interesting because going back to the Levits, makes me wonder how much honor they had. They apparently were really big on segregating their housing, like didn't want people of color moving into their housing, which makes me wonder where their allegiances were when they had practices like that. I'm thinking perhaps their household, there wasn't that much honor to it. And Paul talks about that. He says, that every house is built by someone, and the builder of that house has the honor. But here's the deal. Everything is built by God, right? The builder of all things is God. So anything that we build, and you've heard me talk about this before, anything that we build is built upon a foundation that God has already laid, including, what the Levits built. They were building on a foundation that God had already laid. Just if you want to talk about the creation that they manipulated then to build things that they would only open to certain people, which is just messed up in all kinds of sorts of ways. And so Paul is talking about that we are part of this household of God. And then he gets into talking about the difference between Moses and Christ. And Moses, he says, was faithful in all of God's house. He was a part of God's household, and he was faithful to God and to that household and honored it as best as he could and as great as he could. He said, but now there's a difference between Moses, who was a servant of God in that household, and Christ himself, who is a son, who is the Son of God, the son of the householder, the son of the founder of the house. And he says, we are all made a part of that household, the household of God, the household of Christ. And that's how we identify ourselves. We are now a part of his house. And the other interesting thing is that we suddenly have this shift. And he says, we are his house. So we are at once a part of the household of God through Christ, but we ourselves are also the house, like the building, the structure in which God now abides. We are, we get to think about like the actual physical structures and things like that, but in Hebrews, it's God is living in us, in the body of believers. We are his abode. We are his oikos. We are his house, and we are his household. How cool is that? That's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. But we are his house, and we're built on this hope. And that's the important thing. That identity as being God's house and being a part of God's household should transcend all of our petty allegiances to other households. It should lead us, to realize the errors like the Levits made that are part of being part of the household of God, the household of faith, the household of Christ. should transcend all these allegiances we have to whatever ancestry, race, nationality. If we call ourselves a part of Christ's household, that should be our allegiance, and that should be where things lie, not in the little petty things that we seem to get caught up in, whether it be nationalities, denominations, clubs, whatever. Our allegiance is to God and to his household if we call ourselves a part of that through Christ. In other words, if we, as he ends up here in Hebrews, if we hold firm the confidence and the pride that belongs to hope, as the author of Hebrews tells us. So, go out and live your life like you are a part of God's household, not just a householder on your own. Don't be so tied up in all the little allegiances that seem to divide us. Be a part of God's household. Well, that is it for today, and we will be back tomorrow for Friday, June 12th. We'll see you tomorrow. Boop.